Hello everybody, welcome back. Thank you for tuning in to another episode in the series here. My name is Dominic and I'm the host of the Android Factory. First of all, I have to thank you guys. We crossed 2,000 subscribers since the last video. Really means a lot to me. I've been enjoying building this content out here for you, and let's just keep the ball rolling here. Thank you again so much. Please consider subscribing if you are brand new and smash that like button if you're already a part of that 2,000. We're looking on to 3,000 next. Alright, so in today's video we're going to go ahead and migrate the main activity here, which is just this screen that we see here, to actually incorporate the Jetpack Navigation Components, which will allow us to, build out a handful of different interactions and just more screens in a 2022 based way. We're going to incorporate fragments in that whole thing. We're going to get the Nav Graph set up, and we're going to go ahead and do all of that here. So I have the documentation pulled up here. I'll link it in the description of the video. And that's about it. So we're just gonna copy some of this here. Went ahead here and just pasted it in. Again, the code for this entire project is also on GitHub, so find the links in the description. And then just following along here with the documentation, it says to create a navigation graph. We can go ahead and do that by following these few steps. So let's go ahead and open our project structure here. We can open the res directory inside of our main package here. And then we are just going to right click and select new Android resource file. We're going to name this, there's only going to be one nav graph, at least for now. So we are going to just name it nav graph. We are then going to select from the resource type the navigation. That will actually create a navigation directory. You'll notice that it doesn't exist over here. But once we go through and click OK, we now have this navgraph.xml inside of this navigation package. And it's quite empty. One thing that we can do here is we can go the split route, and we could see here the navigation graph that we've created. So we have an ID here that kind of correlates to the name of it, and then we see the root tag here is navigation. So all of the content that is inside of here is going to be relevant for navigation, navigating around the app. At the moment we only have one screen, so we're only going to need to add one particular fragment. So for now we're just going to go ahead and create a fragment in the root level here. So we're just going to go with products list fragment. For now, we're just going to leave an empty class here. We're just going to have this class extend our fragment, and then we're going to come back to this in a minute. But now that we have that, we can actually set up our nav graph here appropriately. So we're going to go ahead and open up a little, bracket there, and we're going to type the word fragment. And there's going to be a handful of things that we can define here. So we'll start with an ID. The ID idea here is the same as it is in every XML file. It's a unique way to reference a particular, in this case, fragment, but you're probably most familiar with it in views and whatnot. This normally correlates to kind of the name of the fragment there, so we're just going to go ahead and add in product list fragment as the ID. And then we'll go ahead and look at some other ones here. So the name is actually the direct path to that entire fragment. It kind of figured it out for us. There's only one, so Android Studio helped us out there. And then here we can have the label as well, which will then just say products list. There's one more attribute here that we can add in. That's called tools:_layout. And this is helpful for the preview aspect of things because right now there is no layout associated with this fragment. So it's a little difficult to see that from within this editor kind of view. So we can go ahead and make a layout file, and then we'll see that present here. So at the moment here, if we look at our layout, the only two things in here are the activity main and then the epoxy model product item. So we're going to go ahead and just create a new one here. This one is going to be, as you could assume, fragment underscore products list here. And basically it's going to mimic the current structure of the main activity. So we're just going to go ahead and copy this entirely because that is what we care about for displaying inside of our fragment here. So we're just simply going to do that. Yeah, I think that's about it, right? Because that's the fragment that we care about, and that's what we want it to look like. So now in the nav graph here, we can go at layout, fragment products lists. Just believe we need to move this. Oh, it already worked, but normally we put it up there so it's accessible for everyone. And then now we can see that the products list fragment, let me make that a little bigger. The products list fragment here has a particular layout associated with it, so that is helpful just when you're visualizing the map of your app. I believe this little error here is saying yes, there's no start destination specified, so we can very easily just update the start destination attribute here, and it will only be able to be a particular ID here to the fragment. So the idea is that this navigation graph is going to hold all of the navigational patterns, the ways you can move from fragment A to fragment B, or fragment A to fragment C, support deep linking, nested nav graphs, all that kind of stuff. So one of the key attributes that the navigation graph needs is it needs to know where to start. Once we added in this attribute for start destination that pointed to a particular fragment here in the file, we then got this little home icon associated with this product list fragment. We'll just quickly delete it here, and you'll see that that goes away now. It's not there. And then if we just go ahead and put it back, the home fragment will be there. So now this graph understands this is the beginning, this is the entry point of the graph. And that is super helpful because then the system will kind of boot things up with this page already loaded, which is exactly what we would expect. There is a little bit of configuration that we need to do inside of the activity here, and we just need to update our layout to accommodate that. So we are going to copy this little fragment container view here. We're going to go over to the activity main here, and we're just going to go ahead and paste this in its place. All right, and after a tiny bit of cleanup here, this is all that we need. So we incorporated this fragment container view. This is part of the library that we imported in the beginning of the video. The name here points to a particular implementation. This is a nav host fragment. This is something, again, that comes with the library. We tell it 00dp for height and width, and then we go ahead and constrain it everywhere. We tell it the default nav host to be true. It's kind of boilerplatey. I would just expect that this would be the case. But anyway, this is also an important attribute here, the nav graph. We point it to the nav graph file that we had defined, right? The one that we created right here. So now we're kind of syncing things up. We're telling the activity, here is a container view, and basically operate with this nav graph, and now we can define all of our stuff in here. So this is a lot cleaner than running into intents and different activities. It's a lot easier to navigate around the app. And now this activity acts as a central point for all of our fragments, which is helpful because at times we can share information or we can have something attached to the activities lifecycle, and that would span all of our fragment lifecycles. So it does help every now and then. And then we're just going to go ahead and do a little bit of cleanup here inside of our main activity because obviously we do not have all of this stuff here. So it's just going to be a lot of copy and paste. Let me go ahead and get this done, and then we'll talk about it in a minute. All right, folks, welcome back. So as we can see here, our main activity is pretty slim now. Realistically, this function has just been floating around, so there's really nothing here other than creating a binding here and then setting that content view to be the binding.root. We don't need this Android. Well, we might need it later in the future, so I'm going to leave it, but right now we don't need it. And instead, we are going to go ahead and bounce over to the fragment here, and I'm just going to go ahead and attach it there as well. Also, I think I'll take back what I said. I believe the @Android entry point needs to be at the activity level if the activity level contains a fragment that is using the @Android entry point. I could be wrong about that. Someone please feel free to correct me in the comments, but I do think that is the case. And that is the relationship here, so we're just going to leave it in both places. But we'll go top to bottom here in this file. So yes, the product list fragment extends our Android app fragment. We have our binding set up here, the non-null version the nullable version being a var, the non-null version being by lazy, asserting non-null along the way. And then we copied over the view model stuff from the activity. I renamed that main activity view model to the products list view model to just kind of match the products list fragment. And this is kind of the syntax for getting a view model at the activity level. And instead, we can actually have a shorthand version here, view models here. And now this product view model by view models, this is an extension function on Fragment. And what this will do is basically scope this view model to this particular fragment. So that's something to keep in mind as we start navigating around, that the view model is not going to be there in memory the entire time. Pretty boilerplate stuff here as far as on create view. We set up our binding here. We return the binding.root as far as the view that we need. And then this should look very familiar. This is the on view created. This is basically the stuff that came from the activity. We create our epoxy controller. We set that controller. We force the loading state. We have our combine work here. Distinct until change. This is all copy and paste here, except we get down to this point and there is an error here. There is no this, well, there is a this in the fragment, but it's not a lifecycle owner. Instead, it's best to kind of tie this to the view lifecycle owner. It actually even tells you that as kind of the tooltip. And so we're going to go ahead and just update it to the view lifecycle owner. This is just to ensure that your flows, your live data, your observation is tethered to the view's lifecycle, not the actual fragment's lifecycle, because at a technical level, the fragment can outlive its view, like computationally speaking, but for the user, obviously, they care really about the view. So we don't want to be receiving updates to something when the view is destroyed, but the fragment is not yet destroyed, because that could lead to bugs. We don't have a UI to update at that point. Tell the view model to refresh the product, so everything here is pretty straightforward. I did forget on the onDestroy view here, we do just want to null out our binding. Again, the same exact reason. It's because the view layer, the view component of the fragment can be destroyed before the actual fragment does, so we just need to make sure that we are kind of cleaning things up here. This is pretty standard stuff as far as implementing view binding with fragments. But other than that, I think we are good to go here, so we could just go ahead and run this, and we should see more or less the exact same thing we saw previously. All right, and we are coming back up to life here, and as we see, the loading state and everything works exactly as we would expect here, right? We can still favorite things and unfavorite them, and so the application works exactly the same. There's really not much to it. However, under the hood, this is its own fragment now. This is not just an activity. There is now a different layer here. This allows for a handful of different things: reusability, customizability, and then just ease of use for us as developers, so that we have one activity, we work with different fragments, and we can just move on from there. Okay, and that is basically it. That's basically how to convert from the activity implementation into a fragment implementation. So if you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing if you are brand new to not miss out on future content, and hang around if you're looking for a little bit of extra credit here. So the other thing that we did inside of our nav graph was we defined a field called Android label here, and that says products list on it, right? However, in the toolbar here in the action bar, it is just set up as fake store, and that's just the default implementation for this particular theme. Now, I don't know if we're going to go ahead and keep this, but we do have the for the entire, this overarching style that we have for our application here, specifically at least for this activity, we have the material components day, night, dark action bar theme. So there is an action bar, inside of our activity without us needing to actually define it in, an XML file somewhere. This may change down the road, because I normally tend to do this so that you have more control over the actual toolbar on each screen as opposed to just one throughout the entire application. But that being said, we can at least update this implementation a little bit so that we can make use of this label attribute here. So again, inside the activity, all we have is the fragment container view. We don't have anything about a toolbar, and same goes for the fragment here. We just literally have a recycler view in here. So this is all just based on the current theme that we're using. And so we can go ahead and actually fetch the nav controller, and we can set things up a little bit. We could set the UI up with the nav graph, and it'll actually pull data from the nav graph to display here in the title instead of fake store. So I'm going to try to do this from memory. I apologize if I fumble it, but first we're going to get our nav host fragment here. And unfortunately, it's not as simple as just, fetching this view here or anything like that you would normally do, right? Instead, we actually have to ask, because this name attribute here inside of this container view is an implementation of a fragment. This nav host fragment is in and of itself a fragment, right, that gets attached to the activity, and then that manages all of these different transactions and makes everything kind of come together. So we actually can't just reference it like a particular view. Instead, I believe we need to ask the support fragment manager, find fragment. I think it's find fragment by ID. Now this ID is going to be the ID of the actual view in there, and then we need to cast it to the nav host fragment ID. So we're going to go like that. Then from our nav host, we can get our nav controller, and that is a much simpler operation. That's just asking the nav controller from the nav host fragment. And then we can simply call a setup action bar with nav controller. And this takes a handful of different parameters here. The first one that we're just going to use, I think we can just pass in nav controller, and it will work just fine. So let's go ahead and rerun this, see how it looks. Yep, And so now we see that the UI here updates to product list. And the fun part about this is that if we ever add in another fragment, right, that then is an account fragment, and user can customize their account page or something like that, and we change this label here on that fragment to say something like account, when we navigate from this fragment to the account fragment, this toolbar will update automatically because of this little configuration that we've done here already. So yeah, this is a helpful tool. Again, it might not stay completely because we do have, we might want to approach this a little bit differently, but this is how you do that if you're interested. There is also one more thing on here called the app bar configuration that we can dive into in a little bit, but there you can specify top level fragments, and that has a couple of benefits when you start talking about the bottom tab view or a drawer layout, so that the back arrow doesn't appear on certain fragments, but then in other fragments it will appear and it will navigate you backwards accordingly. So if that was tough to follow, don't worry about it. We'll get to it in the future. Just going to go ahead and revert that to products list. And otherwise, that is about it. That's all I got for you folks. So thank you so much. If you made it this far, if you stuck around for the little extra credit, go ahead and comment down below extra credit. That'll be great. That'll be a great way to see who has made it through. Thank you so much. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Enjoy the rest of your day.